Hello plant lovers and welcome to my channel. Today's fabulous orchid is this beautiful Oncidium here, and it is called Sharry Baby Red Fantasy. And I would have to say more of a plum than a red, just saying. But enough of that. Look at this fabulous plant. Look at those glorious flowers and a very generous spike with a lot of flowers, some of which still haven't quite come out. So I am looking forward to quite a bit of flower time from this baby. Let's talk Oncidiums then. This one, the Sharry Baby type of Oncidium, is famous, ladies and gentlemen, for its fragrance. And I have to say that is why I actually bought a Sharry Baby, because they are famed for their fragrance. But I have another Oncidium, which I made a video about. I will link that up there. And I have to say, the fragrance isn't amazingly out of the ballpark different to the other one. And the flowers are not that dissimilar. So I feel, plant lovers, that in terms of Oncidiums for fragrance, I may have done my dash. Anyway, that is not to diminish the fragrance of this one, because it is unbelievable. Now, imagine this, it's 1987, it's winter, you're in Paris and you see an Yves Saint Laurent boutique across the Champs-Élysées, and in you go, there are glints of gilt, smoke, it's a dark night, you open the door and pfft, what is the smell? It's this. This smells like an 80s perfume, and I know that might sound negative, but it's not. It is so rich and opulent. It's a chocolatey, spicy velvet smell. Hard to describe. Imagine chocolate velvet cake mixed with chili and spice, put in an Yves Saint Laurent boutique in Paris in 1987, and you might have a sense of what this orchid smells like. It is amazing. And like with most highly fragrant orchids, it turns off and turns on, I guess, to attract its pollinator, so at peak pollinating time, which means it tends to switch on sort of early mid-morning, and then it will tend to switch off as the sun sets. So there's no nighttime fragrance from this baby. And the other thing is, it is not overpowering in a room. I have this on the dining table where I work, and the fragrance is ambient. So you can definitely smell it and it's beautiful, but it doesn't fill the room. It's not overpowering. So don't be afraid. And of course, the end game with Oncidiums is to get a good sized specimen plant so you get multiple spikes, which do look amazing. And then you're filled with this amazing spray of color, but incredible heady fragrance. Okie doke. To basics, it's an Oncidium. I think I've gone through Oncidium care before, but let's do a quick 101. Oncidiums are generally intermediate, so they don't like to be too cold. However, I am in Melbourne, and I'll show you exactly where that is now. Southeast Australia. Our climate here is a sort of cool temperate climate, but we do have hot summers. So that is not dissimilar to a zone 10 in the US and parts of Southeast England, if you're lucky, without the cold, wet winters. Melbourne's winters are both cold and wet, but they don't freeze. And our summers can be crazy hot or all over the place. So today, for example, the maximum is 17 degrees Celsius, whereas 2 days ago it was 36 degrees Celsius. So yeah, Melbourne is notorious for having mixed climate. And the point of me making these videos was because I found it hard to find information about the sort of things that I could grow in my city. Anyway, Oncidiums are definitely one of them. I do keep most of my Oncidiums outdoors from spring until late autumn, until the temperature starts to get below about 10 degrees Celsius, which is around 50 degrees Fahrenheit. So that is a reasonably chilly evening. Like all Oncidiums, Sharry Baby is loving bright but diffused light, a little bit of direct sun in the morning, and then a diffused and dappled light for the rest of the day. And I do find that Oncidiums respond to a little more light in winter, which does make them actually ideal as an indoor plant, because you can generally give them the conditions that they need indoors. But as I said, mine do summer outdoors and then winter indoors. And where they are kept indoors in winter, they get quite strong morning light, and then it's diffused afterwards. But it is quite bright, and I think that they seem to thrive in those conditions. Watering, I think we've touched on before, essentially a little often. Do ease off in winter. Don't let them dry out completely, but let it dry out reasonably between waterings in winter. Obviously in spring and summer, when it starts to go through its growth phase, that's when you want to increase your watering and maybe start to add your fertilizer as well. Oncidiums tend to put on their new growth spurt in spring, which is when they're going to produce new pseudobulbs for you, and you want those, as many as possible, because you want those to mature so that the following year they will produce a flower spike. And the fertilizer I use for this is just a couple of grains, literally a couple of grains of a slow release fertilizer into the medium. And then every so often I give it a little bit of a liquid dose of a seaweed based general fertilizer. I always repot an orchid as soon as I get it because, plant lovers, I'm a terracotta pot kind of guy. Now, really, it doesn't make any difference, although it might do. For me, it's about aesthetics. I just love the look of terracotta more than plastic, and you know, plastic's killing us slowly. Terracotta does evaporate water more quickly than plastic does, which tends to retain water. So it's actually quite good for orchids because it allows the medium to drain fairly quickly, and because it evaporates, it does kind of create a little humidity crib around your orchid, and orchids tend to like a bit of humidity, so it works in their favor. The medium that I pot Oncidiums in is a mix of an average orchid bark mix with a little bit of charcoal, a little bit of perlite, a sprinkling of shell grit, which is actually chicken food, but it's full of calcium, and then the secret ingredient, mycorrhiza fungus powder, which I sprinkle a tiny bit in the medium when I'm repotting it, and that stimulates root growth, but it also enables the plants to draw out the nutrients from the soil. So the fungi acts as sort of a go-between, and it actually helps take out the calcium from that shell grit and make it available for the plant. I'm all about beneficial root fungus. There we are. We have got light. It likes bright indirect light. A little bit more in winter I find is helpful. Water, pretty much consistent for most orchids. Lay off a little bit in winter. Let it dry out a little, but not completely. Oncidiums have pseudobulbs, which they can store water in, which enables them to get through a little bit. Don't let it dry out completely. As with most Oncidiums, the flower spike comes from a mature pseudobulb. So what you want to do, as this one has here, is to promote vegetative growth, because the more mature pseudobulbs you have, the more chance you have of getting multiple flower spikes, and that, plant lovers, is the name of the game. Again, Oncidiums like to be more on the pot-bound spectrum of space in their pot, so go for the smallest pot that you can get the roots into when you are repotting. And in fact, you might not need to go up a size if you're repotting an orchid that you bought. You might even need to go down a size. And Maddie's cheap trick is, Oncidiums are very common in flower shops and garden shops and florists. And the minute that the flowers start to die and the flower spike's looking unattractive, the shops do tend to discount them because they need to move them on, because they look ugly and no one is going to buy an orchid with a dead flower spike, apart from us plant lovers, because it is a really cheap way to add to your collection. So I've bought quite a few that have been half price. You have to wait a year, perhaps sometimes less, for them to go through their flowering cycle again, but there you go. It is a great way to pick up orchids on the cheap. And talking of flowering cycles, Oncidiums can vary. Some will flower twice a year, some will flower sporadically through the year, others will flower once a year, and it does tend to be in spring. So they do tend to produce their flower spikes in winter and flower in spring and early summer, as this one has done. Now, I've only owned this for less than a year, so I'm not sure if it's going to flower and is capable of flowering twice in a year, so we'll see. But the other Oncidiums I have flowered twice a year. Once in spring and once in autumn. So we'll see how this goes. You know, I can also smell vanilla. Ooh, it's amazing, this fragrance. Sharry baby, you've got to get yourself one because the smell really is unique. And lastly, as with lots of orchids, Oncidiums are, well, they're a South American species, generally from southern USA through Central America down to northern South America, and they are largely epiphytes, which means they are used to getting water in one fell swoop, which they then absorb quickly, and it drains away very quickly. So the thing is not to keep them too wet, not to let them sit in water because they do not like soggy roots, and they often do respond to a drier spell, which is why you might want to keep them drier in winter, but I wouldn't let them completely dry out, because particularly in a pot and in indoor culture is not exactly the same as the wilds of southern Mexico. So bear that in mind. I do find it useful though to find out where an orchid is from. Obviously there are lots of hybrids these days, but if you can get a sense of where its parents or grandparents came from, you can try and replicate those conditions either in your home or outdoors and try to match the orchid to that, and it will thrive and bloom as this one has done. There we are, plant lovers. Thank you for watching. Thank you, Sharry Baby Red Fantasy, for being so beautiful and such an amazing fragrance. I think I'm going to be able to have these blooms for quite some time, which makes me very happy. Take care wherever you are. Enjoy growing whatever you're growing, and I will hopefully see you next week with some other fabulous orchidy updates.